Okay, today we are going to do section 4.1 called Congruent Polygons. A quick review from last chapter. Polygons are named by their vertices, which are their corners, and they're going around either clockwise or counterclockwise. Usually you start with the lowest letter alphabetically. So in this one down here, we would look at polygon A, B, C, D. That's not a requirement, that's just how your book will do it. We're going to talk about corresponding parts. When we say that two polygons are congruent, we say that all of their parts are congruent. So if these two polygons are congruent, angle B would correspond to the part in which you would take one segment and move it on top of the other one. So angle B would correspond to angle G, because angle G would land on top of angle B if one was on top of the other. Okay? Same thing works with segments. Since polygons are made up of angles and segments, segment IF, if you slid it over, would land on top of segment DA. Notice I put, since I was first, I put D first because I corresponds to D. Your statements, congruent statements, are what you would say, the way you would name polygons and say that the whole polygon is congruent to the whole polygon. Okay? Corresponding parts have to match up. So since these two polygons are congruent, if I named this one A, B, C, D, if I was going to say it was congruent to the other polygon, I would name this one so that it matched up the corresponding parts. Whatever corresponds to A would be the first letter. So F would be our first letter. Since B is our second letter, it corresponds to G. G would be our second. C is our third, C corresponds to H, so H would be our third. And fourth, D corresponds to I, so it would be A, B, C, D is congruent to F, G, H, I. Notice you can get this information straight from here. So even if your picture disappeared, you could still, angle B corresponds to, and you could figure out angle G just from the congruent statement. IF corresponds to DA. So even without the picture, just given the congruent statement, you can find your corresponding parts. So let's try that. If I give you the congruent statement for a polygon, can you find all the corresponding parts? First question, what kind of figures is this? What kind of polygon is this? Well, it has 7 vertices, 7 corners, so that means it's a 7-sided figure. And what do we call a 7-sided figure? It's a heptagon. Now, we don't know what the heptagon looks like, but we do know it's a heptagon because it's got 7 sides. In a heptagon, how many angles does a heptagon have? It's got 7 angles. How many sides does a heptagon have? 7 sides. So how many corresponding parts are there in these two polygons? There are 14 corresponding parts. Can you name them all? As an example, there would be angle A would correspond to what? Angle H. And you could go right on down the line. Angle B and angle N, angle C and angle M. And then you could do the same thing with the sides. An example of one side would be EF. EF in the one polygon would have to be congruent to what in the other polygon? E corresponds to K, F corresponds to J, so it would be KJ. You can also use these statements to find values. For example, segment BC in this one would be congruent to what in this one? And the answer to that would be NM. Okay? If MN, if the distance from M to N is 5, then the distance from what value to what value would be at 5. You just go over to the other one, find its matching parts. So it would be from C to B is 5. Angle D would be congruent to which angle in the other polygon? And that would be angle L. You can also use your congruent statement to find values using algebra, because we always use algebra. Okay? It says that angle E is 32 and that angle K is 2x plus 6. So you go up here and find the relationship. Well, angle E and angle K, since they're corresponding, have to be equal to each other. So you would set it up and say 32 equals 2x plus 6. And then you would use that equation to solve for x. So you would minus your 6 over to the other side. You'd get 26 equals 2x. You would divide both sides by 2, and x would be 13. So you can also use your algebra skills along with your congruent statement to find your pieces that match up and to find missing values. That's what you need to know about corresponding parts.